Hey everyone, my name is Rosalind B. Sterling. I'm an adult crime comedy writer, as well as an artist and an editor who occasionally does reviews and analysis for media. And today, I'll be analyzing/reviewing Hazbin Hotel Season 1 just to give my thoughts on everything from the good to the bad to whatever falls in between that. And since this is an analysis, I will be critiquing it from an in-depth creative perspective, which means I'll be tearing into and critiquing basically everything. But in the end, no one needs to look into it this deeply since, hey, sometimes we just want to watch something as a casual viewer, no matter how good or bad it may be. And that's valid. But if you want some more in-depth viewpoints, stick around. Keep in mind that all these opinions are solely my own, but if you have any thoughts you want to add, let me know, since I love discussion and hearing different perspectives. However, please keep any conversations polite and mature. This show is notorious for attracting drama and crazy fans, so any dumb discourse or catfights in the comments will probably get deleted. Now let's get into the video. The story itself is good. I like the concept of all these wacky demons trying to get rehabilitated and watching the chaos that ensues from it. I think it's a unique and refreshing spin on religious-based fiction. But as we watch the show, we see that there's more to it than just a peppy demon princess trying to rehabilitate sinners with lots of edgy humor thrown in. And I think this complexity is both a good and a bad thing. Good because there are many details to this series that I don't think many people expected, and it goes to show that it's more than just a silly cartoon. It's a whirlwind of messages, deep character arcs, and analysis of morality. I always find it fun when something simple turns out to have a lot more depth than expected and hooks you in. But my issue here is how many plot points they blew through in this season. I'll go more into detail about that in the pacing section, but overall, they tried to cram at least 2 to 3 seasons worth of plot into one season. Not even a long season, it was only 8 episodes. I loved all the details, but because of the short amount of screen time they were working with, this made all those fun, in-depth plot ideas somewhat hard to follow and feel rushed and disorganized. Another thing too, and this is something I'll also get into later, but as great as these in-depth and serious concepts are, it feels like they're trying to force an unserious show to be serious, which hurts the handling of these topics. It sometimes makes the show seem unequipped or unqualified to tackle these topics because they can't decide whether or not they want to be a silly comedy or a deep story. I'm not saying you can't have both, because you can, but the show struggles to find the right balance, unfortunately. This show puts in effort to explore the black, white, and gray areas when it comes to human morals, actions, and even religion. It shows that sometimes there's good in people you wouldn't expect, and for others, well, some people never change. I remember growing up and being taught fucked up logic about religion and how being a Christian automatically makes you a good person because, well, you're a Christian. That's all you need. Despite the fact that most of the people who hurt me were from the church. And although this show isn't directly based on Christianity and wasn't made to jab at people's beliefs, it does a good job of showing the hypocrisy not only in religion but within people as a whole. No matter what your beliefs are, some people have skewed ideas of what makes a person good or bad. People who claim they're good will turn around and stab you in the back, while some people deemed as bad by society are actually awesome folks who were given an unfair label for unfair reasons. And although this show does legitimately have bad characters since, it's hell, not all of them are irredeemable. Although I do think the show could have leaned a little more into this morality exploration since it seems like it's trying to be super deep, but is sticking to playing in the sandbox rather than the whole playground. Everything is just sort of surface level, I guess, with its not everything is as it seems message about characters' moral compasses, and I see a lot of potential ground that could have been covered. It's an adult cartoon after all. I would like to see more adult content that wasn't just sex, violence, and swearing. It would have been cool to really see them get down to the nitty-gritty horrors of this world. Show how bad hell can really be, rather than just showing characters fucking cursing and random acts of slapstick violence. This is like what a kid would probably imagine hell being like. And there's nothing wrong with that, since it's still a cartoon, and I think adults are allowed to enjoy this sort of silly, edgy twist on hell. And clearly this show wants to take that route sometimes. I think Vivzy tweeted once that she was heavily inspired by people like Seth MacFarlane, which is why there's so much crude language and humor in her shows, and I see nothing wrong with that. But Seth MacFarlane-level humor and deep explorations of morality, sexual assault, genocide, and more aren't concepts that mix well together. I mean, imagine Seth MacFarlane producing a show with his trademark humor that also doubles as a serious discussion of the same topics he's joking about. It just doesn't work together, which is why I think Hazbin struggled so much to balance between silly and serious. You can have both, but the way they approached it didn't clash well. I want to see this show break its chains and take things as seriously as it should. It can still keep its humor and crude jokes, but needs to find a better way to balance them. Show us the horrifying sides of hell without hiding behind toilet humor. There are surely more dark parts to this place that have more than just mustache-twirling villains. We really only saw something legitimately and realistically dark in Angel's arc with Valentino, which I'll discuss later in this video. But then again, if they did go deeper into evil themes here, people would probably just complain about the characters being too mean and evil, which is like the whole fucking point, but I digress. Hopefully we'll see more in-depth moral explorations in later seasons. Let me make it clear now that I love all these characters. I think they're all super lively, fun, and complex. But my biggest issue here was how many were thrown in. I literally couldn't keep up. There was so much about so many of these characters that I wanted to learn about and just didn't because we were being tossed 10 new cast members in every episode. So we skipped over so many opportunities to explore really interesting arcs because the show was in such a rush to get through them all instead of just calming down and focusing on a select few. My biggest example is Mimsy. I have always loved her character, even before the pilot aired, and all we had were a few concept drawings. So I was super excited to see her appear. But she served little purpose. She was literally just a plot device to tell Alistair's backstory and trigger him into showing off some of his powers and dedication to protecting the hotel. I feel like we easily could have done that without throwing in a random character that never showed up for the rest of the season. I would have instead loved to see a separate episode later on that delved deeper into Mimsy's character, and maybe even her backstory with Alistair since they were in the same circle while they were alive. That would have been a great opportunity to not only develop Mimsy better, but also get some juicy insight into Alistair's past and any important details from his time alive on the off chance any of that is important. I also want to mention her interruption of Alistair and Lucifer's song, and say that, although it was annoying, her action isn't out of character, so I'll give her a pass on that one. She only interrupted the final argument between Lucifer and Al, and they weren't really singing anymore by that point anyway. So I don't think she deserves the hate she's getting, and I'm happy just to see her in the show even if they could have introduced and explored her better. But yeah, I just wish they calmed down on all the character introductions because I love all these cast members but couldn't keep up with everyone and wish we had more time to focus on a few at a time rather than speeding through a bajillion of them. Moving on, I think the character arcs struggled with a similar issue. I love how deeply we got to know these characters and how much they developed and changed over the season. But once again, I just wish it slowed down a bit. It's also hard to comment on this because the series isn't over, so therefore neither are the arcs. But honestly, the arcs felt very rounded off by the end. All but Alistair's, whose arc raised more questions for me and felt like we only traveled a quarter around the circle. But that's to be expected since he's purposefully the most mysterious character of the bunch. We aren't going to see a full 360 arc for him in one season. But all in all, the season finale felt like a good end to this chapter. I just wish they left a few more things open since these arcs were so rounded off that it felt just a little too perfect. Charlie reconnected with her dad, Angel and Husk developed the start of a romance together, Charlie and Vaggie overcame major obstacles and revealed secrets, becoming closer than ever before, Angel finally stood up to Valentino, the V's got their little we won moment even if it's only temporary, Adam fucking died, Alistair reconnected with Rosie as well as Mimsy only to get pissed at her and possibly break off that friendship for the time being, Charlie and Al solidified their sort of father-daughter or mentor-mentee relationship, even if it's kind of fake, as well as made a deal together, Nifty got to finally stab something other than bugs, so on and so forth. I mean, a lot happened. This doesn't mean that there's nothing left to explore with these guys, but my problem is this. We not only skipped ample moments to better explore the cast members, but their arcs were rushed and it felt like we got from point A to point Z way too quickly. Again, this was just too much to cram into only 8 episodes. This one's a doozy, so buckle up. I also want to put it out there that the Judgmental Critter here on YouTube did a perfect job of explaining some of the issues with the character designs, so I recommend checking them out, but I do want to give my perspective and add some points. I personally love these designs and think they're fun, unique, and a breath of fresh air compared to the shitty character designs we usually get in adult animations nowadays. And I especially don't want to judge too harshly since, hey, the creator loves these designs, a lot of fans love these designs, and even if they're not subjectively good, people should be able to create whatever they want. But I also want to discuss my personal opinions on how I think these designs could be improved. 1. I don't think their designs properly represent their animal counterparts. I wouldn't know Charlie is akin to a sheep, or Baggy is based on moths, or Angel Dust is a spider, or Alistair is a deer, etc. if no one told me. Charlie just looks like a default blonde bitch with clown makeup on. Although perhaps they wanted her to look basic, like a Disney princess parody maybe? I think that kind of fits, so maybe it was on purpose, but I'm not sure. Baggy doesn't scream moth except maybe her hair a little, but that's about it. Angel Dust literally looks nothing like a spider aside from the extra eyes, which I thought were just decorative dots considering he, like many other characters, are littered with those. And Alistair is just a dude with ears that sort of look like hair. He has antlers, but you can hardly ever see them unless he shifts to his aggressive demon form. So on and so forth. 2. There's no shape variety. There is one character who isn't ridiculously skinny, and it's Mimsy. Everyone else's body types are basically the same shape. And I'm not saying you can't have skinny characters, but they're literally all the same type of skinny. If you're gonna make them all thin, at least add variety. Make some hourglass, make some rectangular, make some curvy, etc. There are still ways to differentiate them even with similar body types. 3. The designs are overly complex with eyesore color palettes and redundant elements. They're all giving me Raven, Acid Bath, Princess of the Darkness, met middle school DeviantArt recolor OC vibes. And look, I'm glad Viv kept most of her original vision for the show. And if edgy DeviantArt looking OCs is what you wanted, then slay. I can admire that honestly. But that doesn't mean they're perfect or exempt from issues. I bet they're not only a tragedy to animate, but they can be a bit straining on the eyes after a while. There really doesn't need to be 100 different shades of one color on a single character, or a dozen random dots, stripes, and patterns littered haphazardly over them. Nor do they need to wear the exact same kind of suit and bow tie. Like, seriously, almost everyone wears the same fucking outfit, just in different colors and patterns. And don't get me wrong, I think having colorful, complex designs is fine, and I don't mind seeing characters wear suits a lot. I actually love characters who wear suits and draw a lot of my own OCs in suits, but I don't draw all of them wearing suits all the time unless there's a reason for it. And even in scenarios like that where all the characters need to be dressed super formally, I still put in effort to differentiate the outfits so they're not duplicates of each other. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here since I'm far from a perfect character designer, but I can at least acknowledge these issues and try to avoid them myself. And if adding 10 million different colors and patterns to your character's outfits is the only way you can differentiate them, then maybe your designs need some work. I believe Viv was a child when she first designed a lot of the characters, and the fanbase got so overly attached to them, it made updating their looks for the better difficult without getting extreme backlash. I think the designs are still fun, but could maybe be toned down a bit / simplified, have a tad more actual shape variety in there, and most of all, not include a sickening amount of red. And I'm sure a lot of people are tired of hearing this same complaint, but I just can't help myself. I get it, it's hell, but you can only have so much red and pink before it becomes obnoxious. Just take this screenshot for example. I literally can't tell where half of anyone's limbs are because all the colors just blend into each other. I get that not every single detail has to be visible at all times, but this is just a mess of red, pink, and random details and patterns. And this isn't just a one-off example either. Most of this show looks like this. I want to be able to tell what's going on and not have my corneas burned off with neon color palettes so bright that I might as well just look at a solar eclipse with no protection. Even during the one scene that isn't mostly red, it's still horrifically bright. And I for one love neon colors. But staring at colors like this for every single frame of every single episode gets overwhelming and tiring on the eyes after a while. I just feel like they could have found better methods to use these bright colors in a way that didn't become so obnoxious. It's okay to moderate your color palettes when needed. I've seen a lot of people argue that all of that is just her art style, and I don't want to judge anyone for that because we all have different styles and that's fine. No one needs to bow down to my specific tastes. But I think people are confusing art style with content preference. You can prefer to draw certain things, but that doesn't make it an art style. I could say that I love to draw specifically emo boys and coquette girls with long hair and dark blue backgrounds. But that's not an art style, that's just a specific type of content I'd like to draw. My art style would be things like, how thick or thin do I draw my line art? Do I use more angular lines or softer lines? Do I draw very cartoony proportions or more realistic proportions? Do I use cell shading, blended shading, or stipple shading? So stuff like that. Vivzi's art style is caricature-like proportions, fluid line art, big eyes, big eyelashes, cell shading with occasional gradients, etc. Her choosing to only draw twinkified Tumblr sexy men who all wear the same type of suit or bimbified girls all with copious amounts of red and confusing details vomited onto them isn't a style. It's just content she likes to draw. I guess the coloring could perhaps be considered part of her style, but I think that leans more towards an aesthetic rather than style. Like, I know some artists who only draw in black and white, but they're not incapable of drawing in color and could keep their art style no matter if they draw in color or black and white. Viv is perfectly capable of drawing different body types, shapes, and easier on the eye designs. She just chooses not to. Look, I think everyone should draw what they want. Plus, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because I draw shit like this sometimes too. But these designs are redundant and I personally see a lot of missed potential. There definitely could have been ways to incorporate these bright colors and complex designs without making them repetitive or messy. Just for fun, I'm going to give some ideas on how I personally think these designs could be improved. Firstly, make some of the backgrounds a different color. I don't think the background designs are bad, and again, I know this is hell, but looking at red in nearly every frame for every episode just got boring eventually. Some great examples of hell represented in media would be series like Satina. Am I saying that right? Satina? Or hell, even shows like Smiling Friends or Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell. These shows are very stereotypical depictions of hell with lots of red, obviously. But the reason I think they're better than Hazbin is because not every single thing on the screen is red or a similar color. We can obviously tell these places are hell even despite them not being comprised of 99.9% blinding shades of red. These depictions are also just a lot easier on the eyes to look at. As for the characters, again, I'm not a professional character designer. If you want to see some unique ideas, look up Hazbin redesigns online. Some fans out here are fucking creative. But I just wanted to go over some ideas I had of how I personally think these character designs could be improved. Starting with Charlie, make her look more like a sheep or a goat, or whichever it was they were going for. Give her ears, an animal-like nose, maybe goat eyes. Give her hind legs and some hooves, or at least more visible hooves, since I think she does have those currently, they're just kind of hard to see. She doesn't have to go full furry, but maybe just make her look less like a basic bitch with circles on her face? Is there even a reason her and her dad have those? I also heard that she's supposedly based off of a doll, so if that's true, maybe they could have gone in and added more actual doll-like features? I don't know. Her simple design isn't bad. It's actually kinda nice to look at compared to the absolute messy designs that some of the other characters have. But she just feels like she's missing something. I don't know, she's missing something. The same could be said about her dad. He looks more like a blonde Onceler circus ringleader. I'm not quite sure what they were going for here, to be honest. He doesn't even look like Charlie's dad, he just looks like a gender-bent version of her. I get that some parents and children look very similar sometimes, but they definitely could have differentiated them just a little better. Moving on to Angel, he could have spider pinchers, more obvious extra eyes, and maybe an actual spider abdomen. Vaggie could have moth antenna. Maybe she could be more chubby and fluffy like a moth. Or perhaps she could be buff, considering she's an exterminator and now Charlie's bodyguard. It would make sense that she's getting a lot of exercise. Although I heard someone say that those ideas pose an issue since Adam purposely trained his warriors to fit the body types he prefers, though I'm not sure how well the argument holds, so take all this with a grain of salt. Serpentis was clearly inspired by steampunk, and considering he died in 19th century London, this is a great theme and I wish they ran with it more. I would have loved to see something like a tattered trench coat, goggles, and even his weapons and stuff could be more steampunk themed. And then Husk. I feel like he would definitely have a dad bod and in general look more scrungly. He's a cranky old man who died of alcohol poisoning. He just looks too young and put together to represent that. He would look great if he was maybe some sort of fat tabby cat with missing patches of fur and unruly whiskers. Also, why does he have wings? Correct me if there's a reason for it, the wings just never made sense to me. Fox is another one I think could use a big redesign. My first reaction was, why does he have a flat screen TV head if he died in the 50s? But I think it was confirmed in a background photo that he had an older TV head before, so I'm guessing he just upgraded. But I would have liked that info to be a bit more obvious because for the longest time this also made no sense to me. A good example of a redesign for him was one I saw on TikTok that made him a very large but stout business-leaning gangster dude with an actual 1950s TV head and a black and white staticky face on the screen. That one took the cake as the best redesign I've seen so far, and it makes me wish we got more designs like that in the show. It's not only simpler to draw and animate, but adds so much character and something different / easier to look at. I also want to add that I'm not a huge fan of Carmilla's new design. Look, I'm sorry, but she is built like an elongated starfish. I missed the spindly, smaller horned, creepy look she had in the pilot. And before anyone comes at me saying that that would have been harder to animate, you could say that about any of the characters. If you're gonna make difficult to animate designs, at least make them look a tad better. Moving on to Nifty, I think it would be really cool if she looked more like a bug. Like, give her beetle legs or something, since she's small, bug-like, and hunts bugs. It would be more than fitting. I'd also like to see her hair look more akin to the era she died in, which was also the 50s. All the characters who died a long time ago don't really represent their era that well, but I guess I could just brush that off as them modernizing themselves and keeping up with the times. Although Alistair loves to stick to his time era, yet he doesn't radiate 1920s to 30s all that much, which reminds me. It's time to talk about my favorite character, but the one I also have the most critiques for. Look, Al. Dearly beloved. Love of my life. I think you're amazing, but I have a lot of things I want to say. Like the fact that his design doesn't scream 1920s to 30s radio show host, which I just noted above. His outfit, hair, and just general design don't make him stand out as someone from that time era. A lot of people are also critiquing the fact that he doesn't have any ethnic features despite being mixed-race Creole, because apparently Vivzy just sort of threw that in there so he could be able to practice voodoo. I am going to tread this topic carefully since I am not Creole and don't practice voodoo, so I'm mostly just going to repeat what people from these groups have said online. I do agree that it would have been nice to see ethnic features on him because ethnic features are gorgeous and heavily underrepresented in media. Plus, lots of people from these groups have expressed disdain for him looking whiter than white. But I've also seen some Creole people, and just mixed people in general, say that they look much more Caucasian, and seeing that in his character makes them feel validated. I, for one, actually love seeing pale Hispanics in media for the same reason. I am a somewhat pale/white passing Hispanic, and I love that kind of representation. So I don't really want to say whether making him look white was a correct or incorrect decision, since it may just depend on personal comfort and interpretation. Although, I think some people are less upset over the lack of ethnic features and more upset at the lack of thought Viv put into his representation. She sort of just threw his race in there without much care or research because she wanted an excuse to use voodoo, which I think is represented as more of an aesthetic than an actual practice in the show. Most people don't even know he practices voodoo and think all those symbols around him are just random magic scribbles. If they were going to use voodoo, then maybe make it a little clearer and properly incorporate it better since it's treated like just some random fictional magic rather than an actual religious practice. Especially since some new watchers don't know these details like old fans, and now there are people drawing these symbols or getting them permanently tattooed on their skin, not knowing what they actually mean. So I can see why people are upset over this. Especially since most other people of color in this show are pretty well coded in my opinion. Carmilla being the best example. I knew right away that she was Hispanic, and as a Latina myself, I think she was handled really well. But that's just my opinion, and I don't speak for every Hispanic. But so far, there's nothing even alluding to Alistair being mixed race. At least I don't think. And this could especially be an issue since he, again, practices voodoo, which I've heard is a closed practice and something tied to his race, so that would inherently make his race important. They don't have to force his race in, but even just a small subtle hint would be nice. Like what they did with Carmilla. Her race was hinted at in ways that was subtle but obvious enough that we knew she was Hispanic. But then again, I really don't know what the correct answer is here since there's so much to this show and character that hasn't been revealed yet, and I don't want to make any early assumptions. Especially since I'm just not in a position to say what is right and wrong here. But what I will say is that, although I would have loved to see more ethnic features on Alistair, and the complaints about his race being an afterthought or not approached accurately and appropriately are completely valid, I think the comments about him not looking like a POC, especially the ones coming from white people, are kind of disrespectful considering there is no correct way to look as a POC. Creole people specifically can be very diverse in physical appearances, so I don't think it's anyone's, especially white people's, place to be dictating how any person of color should look. I've seen people in comment sections say things like, he's mixed race, so he's only allowed to have one hair type and no other hair type because it's physically impossible for someone of his race to have any other hair type. Firstly, calm down. Secondly, again, I understand the frustration about Viv not approaching his representation all that well, and acknowledge the fact that he could have been better designed, whether that be through adding ethnic features or just better portrayal of his race through other types of coding. But that statement is simply wrong. There is no correct way for any race to look. We can properly critique representation without simultaneously spreading misinformation. Now, being honest, I do think Al was originally white, and then Viv changed it last minute after getting called out on the voodoo thing, then never bothered to change his design after changing his race. But I also heard that he was inspired by Dr. Facilier, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm so sorry, who's a black man who practices voodoo. So maybe the Creole thing was actually canon from the start? Or maybe it wasn't and she was just inspired by the voodoo in The Princess and the Frog without realizing that it's a religion tied to race and can't be slapped on just any character. I don't know. There's a lot of he said, she said going around, and there's no way to know for sure what her plans and intentions were/are. But please don't say that having certain features automatically means you aren't a person of color. We can acknowledge any poor design and representation done here without invalidating people of color who don't fit stereotypes. Again, I think this really does just come down to personal opinion, since I've seen 50-50 responses from Creole people online, and the opinions that matter most here are people from those groups. So I suggest listening to their thoughts on the matter over mine or anyone else's, so that way you can better understand why they may or may not like Al's representation. Putting race aside for a second, Alistair, like many of the other characters, hasn't changed much at all since Vivzie made him as a child, and it sort of shows. I still love his design, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of areas it had a chance to be improved on, and instead, all they did was add some white to his suit collar and microphone, which I still don't understand why. It's not bad, just a very weird and minimal change. Perhaps they were trying to balance out the overwhelming amount of red, which didn't really work in my opinion. They also changed the shape of his mic a bit. Again, I'm not sure why. The mic doesn't even match well. Like, look at this pentagram-shaped 1920s microphone on his desk. Carrying around something more like this would have looked a lot cooler and more accurate in my opinion. And also, like I said earlier, I wish that they leaned more into the deer theme with bigger antlers, more noticeable hooves, etc. And that's it. All in all, I don't know the full history of these characters, the creators' intentions, or what's planned for them moving forward, so I don't want to make any harsh assumptions or statements until more information is revealed. I still think they look rad as hell, but those are my opinions on elements that I think could be tweaked for the better. The animation is so much calmer than the pilot, thank fucking god. I loved the smooth animation in the pilot, but the characters were literally incapable of making exaggerated jerky movements every 0.0 whatever seconds. The animation now is a lot easier on the eyes. Although it does somehow look a tad stiff at times, and I kinda wish they did get a bit more fluid with it, but I feel like I only see it that way because I got too used to the pilot animation, so now seeing something more toned down looks almost robotic compared to the noodle flappy animation the pilot had. And I really don't want to complain here because this animation is literally so fluid and god tier compared to the garbage animation most studios are pumping out right now. Most companies prefer quantity over quality, even if it means making the animation be literally 2 frames per second, if even that. As for style, again, I have nothing to complain about. I do think the style got a tad bland compared to how things looked in the pilot or even concept art, which is something I do honestly miss. But I once again can't really complain here since this style is still super unique and refreshing to see after years of animation studios making cheap, boring, and unoriginal copy-paste art styles. Like, literally look at this, okay? I'm going to draw my Sona in different cartoon art styles, and I want you to guess what show they're from. Is it Family Guy? Is it American Dad? Is it Final Space? Is it Lower Deck? Is it Big City Greens? Now let me try this. Is it maybe Rick and Morty? Or try this. Is it maybe The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, Futurama? You get my point. Cartoons are slowly growing more and more unoriginal with their cheap styles and cheap animation, and it's nice to see something visually unique for once despite all its flaws. And even with shows like Final Space where the animation is actually crazy good, the style is still very copy-paste. And I'm not saying that cheap animation or style is always bad, since I've seen some series utilize bad animation and styles to their advantage. YOLO and Smiling Friends are my favorite examples since these art styles and animations are so ugly and terrible and just so low quality that it's hilarious and actually requires so much talent to draw. But most shows use terrible animation and styles because they're cheap, not because it works with what they're doing. So seeing some actual high quality animation and art style in a modern cartoon series is insanely amazing. I really enjoyed the dialogue and felt like there were a lot of good moments, quips, and proper word choices that helped with impact, but there are some issues I want to unpack here as well. Swearing, yes, the thing that everyone has been complaining about. I don't think the swearing is as bad as some people make it out to be, since there are some shows that swear way more and no one cares. Like The Sopranos has an average of 83 swears per episode, and The Wire has a whopping swear count average of 102 per episode. The South Park movie also has 399 swears total, and a 1-minute song alone that contained almost 60 swears.
I'm getting pretty sick of him calling my mom. Well, cause mom's a bitch, she's a big fat bitch, she's the biggest bitch in the whole wide world. She's a stupid bitch, and everyone's a bitch, she's a bitch to all the boys and girls. Shut your fucking mouth!
That's nearly a swear per second, yet I don't see people bitching about those shows or making memes about it like, blank if it was written by South Park. So I think this complaint is being taken a little too far, and seeing people complain about it so repetitively is honestly getting more annoying than the actual swearing in the show. But I will admit that it was still a tad annoying at times, especially since I noticed moments where swears would just be thrown in randomly, like background characters popping in just to curse, then popping back out. Still not a huge deal to me honestly, but I'll explain why the swearing worked in some parts and not in others. So I actually did a swear count after watching the episodes again. I don't know if this is 100% accurate since I was just counting whatever I heard and read in the captions, but this should be a good example of what we're working with. Keep in mind that I counted every rude word aside from hell since, this show takes place in hell, so counting that wouldn't be fair. But even words like damn, ass, dick, etc. were counted even if they're not considered swears by everyone. So depending on what you consider a swear, these counts might actually be lower. I also counted the curses in one Hell of a Boss episode, and after dividing the runtime, estimated that the amount of swearing in Hazbin Hotel is about the same as Hell of a Boss, which actually shocked me since it sounded toned down when I first watched it. And I think that's because a good chunk of the swearing is done in places that aren't too noticeable, like under someone's breath or during a fast part of a song. So I didn't even know some characters were swearing until I looked at the captions. There were also moments where the swearing really worked in the moment rather than being thrown in randomly, which made it blend into the dialogue and be less annoying, unlike Hell of a Boss. Overall, I think Adam is the one who swears the most, so if you cut him out, you'd probably chop the swear count down in half at least. And although his constant cursing was sort of annoying at times, it's pretty in character for him and once again not a huge deal breaker for me. It's one of those things where once you notice the swears, they become obvious and a bit distracting, but not enough that it ruined my experience. My thoughts are that I don't think it's the amount of swear words that's the problem, it's how they're used. If they're used appropriately, then it's hard to even notice them because they blend into the dialogue. But if they're being thrown in randomly, then obviously they become annoying. Hazbin was sort of half and half on this scale in my opinion, though I still think the complaints about it are a tad too much. Another thing I had an issue with was how forced and cheesy some of the dialogue was occasionally. It sometimes sounded more like a comic fan dub rather than an actual professionally made cartoon.
A reminder to all, not to mess with the radio demon.
This issue wasn't heavily prominent, but it happened enough times that it made me cringe sometimes. Still not a deal breaker, but I thought I'd mention it. I know there was a lot of drama with the new voice actors since people in this fandom really hate change, and although I do agree that some of the voice acting doesn't have the same charm that the old ones had, they're all pretty much exactly the same as the pilot to the point that I hardly noticed. If anything, I think there were some massive improvements. This is no hate to the pilot voice actors obviously, but voices like Alistair's are a bit higher pitched and more nasally, which I honestly think fits him better. And Husk's voice, which was the biggest change, was honestly one of the best VA switches. It took me off guard at first during the trailer, and I was a bit wary, but after just one episode, I fell in love with it. It fits him so well because the pilot voice actor sounds like he's straining his voice to make it deeper, while Keith David has a naturally deeper voice, so it doesn't sound so forced. Now, of course, this doesn't mean the pilot voice actor is bad, his voice just didn't fit the role. There's also Vox's voice actor, Christian Borle, who was just utterly perfect for this role. I have zero complaints honestly, his tone, vocal range, and delivery are just perfect. But then there's Vaggie. Her voice actor is amazing, but her delivery was super bland and boring. It felt so forced and lifeless compared to the pilot, and it made me sort of dislike her character more. I suspect there was an issue with directing because I don't know why her voice acting is so good in her other roles and not here. Also, Brandon Rogers voicing Katie Killjoy was a whole fucking jump scare. This isn't a critique at all, I just wanted to mention that. Humor is extremely subjective, so take this with a grain of salt. There were some moments that I found corny or cringy, but generally speaking, it all got a good laugh out of me. I think most of the good humor I found in this show worked because of timing, context, and the characters' personalities. Like Nifty is super chaotic, so seeing her do the most unpredictable and sometimes horrifying things, especially when the timing is good, is very funny. Angel's humor isn't always funny to me since it's mostly just mediocre sex jokes, though I don't think it's supposed to make you laugh. He's simply meant to be an annoying, horny bastard. But he still had his funny moments, one of my favorites being this scene.
That bitch is halfway down the street.
Is she?
Oh, she's dancing.
No.
Again, it's the quip and timing that made me laugh. Another thing I loved was the facial expressions. There were some hilarious expressions and visual gags that I thought were great. But we didn't get these often, and I honestly felt like this show missed out on an opportunity to take advantage of that. This show's humor isn't necessarily the type of humor that takes a whole lot of thought to create. It mostly relies on chaos, which is fine. It's just nothing really compared to humor in shows like Archer or The Golden Girls, where the humor is really well thought out and structured in a way that's not only belly-aching hilarious, but has so many layers that the jokes sometimes get funnier the more you think about them and unpack everything. Hazbin doesn't really do this, and that's fine. Super intelligent humor isn't any more valid than silly, chaotic humor. It really just depends on what fits best. And even humor like that could take some deep thinking to come up with, so I don't want to shit on simple, chaotic, and slapstick comedy, especially as someone who enjoys it and even uses it in my own work. It sort of reminds me of shows like Smiling Friends and YOLO, where the humor is literally nothing but chaos, screaming, and horrific yet hilarious animation. It's not super genius award-winning humor by any means, but it still takes a lot of creativity to come up with this stuff. But for shows like Smiling Friends and YOLO, the chaos works perfectly because that's exactly what they were going for. Hazbin is trying to be a very real show with very real subject matter. And so having most of the humor be mostly slapstick and sometimes like toilet humor, it didn't always work in my opinion. I think Hazbin still had some great jokes, of course, especially with Lucifer, since his humor and delivery were just so perfect and honestly some of the funniest and well thought out comedy in the show. But this type of humor wasn't as prominent as I would have liked. Also, this joke—
See, you messed with my daughter, and now I am going to fuck you!
Well, this just got interesting.
It's fuck you up, Dad.
Wait, what did I say?
was great, but prolonged too much. The last part where he's all confused and Adam tackles him was the funniest to me. But we didn't need to see everyone's expression and reactions to it. It just made the joke drag on and ruined the comedic timing. Again, humor is subjective, and I don't think the comedy in this show is award-winning by any means, but there are some good parts that really tickle my funny bone, or at least get a chuckle out of me, so I consider that a win. Phenomenal. I don't have much else to say here other than it was pure music gold. I think the Living Tombstone wrote some of the songs, which would explain why they're so good, but I can't confirm that. All I can say is that this show had amazing music that utilized many diverse genres and made each song specifically to fit the scenes they occupied and the characters' personalities extremely well. Even the less popular songs were still good. My only complaint is that sometimes the song started super randomly with no build-up and it took me by surprise. This wasn't a big deal, but something I noticed. Other than that, I literally have nothing bad to say here and would love to talk more about these songs in the future. Aside from the design issues I mentioned above, I really enjoyed the world we have here. There are so many different parts for so many different groups of people, just like any location with multiple towns and cities. That's both realistic and creative. Although I would have liked to see more of Heaven. It was hyped up so much, but then completely brushed over when we got there. That, in my opinion, was a big missed world-building opportunity. Although I do think the pacing is a bit better than Hell of a Boss and calmed down enough that I don't get a literal headache trying to keep up. It was still extremely fast, and we blew through plot points and major developmental moments too quickly. But I also don't want to blame them for this, since they only had 8 episodes to work with, and I don't think they had much control over the episode number. I miss when seasons were more than 10 episodes long, and actually gave the show time to explore stuff instead of forcing triple the amount of plot points into a single-digit number of episodes. But considering Vivzy is clearly more of an artist than a writer, it's totally possible that, if given more episodes to work with, she would have just done the same thing and shoved in more plots and characters rather than slowing things down. But who knows? There was just so much shit crammed in and covered that aside from the main plot of rehabilitating sinners, I'm not sure what else we can explore when it comes to the smaller subplots and character-driven arcs. There are still a lot of unanswered questions obviously, and a lot of plot still left to explore. But we covered so much ground in this season that it felt almost like a fully rounded story by the end. And again, I don't want to blame Hazbin for this since it's not the only show to do this. Not only do they not have control over the episode number, I don't think, but I've seen lots of series cram in a ridiculous amount of plots and elements into their pilots and or first seasons, and it's mostly because they're scared that they won't get greenlit for future seasons and want to show off as much of their potential as possible to hook viewers. And although I can't confirm that this is the case with Hazbin, it's not impossible to believe. But it's still not a good thing because shoving this much information into a single season is just a lot. They should have minimalized the amount of plot and characters thrown in and utilized that extra time to explore what they already had laid out. I do also want to be honest and mention that a small part of me was kinda happy they shoved a lot of stuff into this season. But that's only because I've been a fan since the pilot and was just so desperate to learn more about everything that I was lapping up all these crazy plot points being thrown at me a mile a minute. But not everyone is going to go into this show knowing what it's about and having a pre-established love for it. They're also not going to have in-depth knowledge on the plot, characters, and other details like older fans will. So speeding through information with little to no setup or proper explanations wasn't a smart move. It's like they expected everyone to just know everything they needed to know before watching it, which can make it harder for newer viewers. I can tell that this show really was made for old, die-hard fans rather than new ones. I don't want to go too deep into this for two reasons. One, I hate discourse and don't want to start drama on my channel by voicing my opinions, since this is one of those things that, no matter what your thoughts are, someone will heavily disagree and will probably get angry, so keep things civil, please. And two, I've been essayed before and I'm still recovering from the many forms of abuse I've experienced over the years, and I just don't want to dig too much into this for the sake of my own sanity. But I do feel the need to voice a few of my thoughts here. I think this representation was handled pretty well. Not perfectly, since there's no such thing as perfect representation, but it did its job. And I'm not saying you have to like this representation or relate to it. We're not a hive mind. Our experiences as victims are different, our opinions are different, our viewpoints are different, etc. But there are lots of victims who legitimately take comfort in Angel as a character and relate to his feelings. And for other people, especially non-victims, to try and dictate what they think is good or bad representation is just not it. Same thing vice versa. If a victim feels this representation is bad and not for them, you can't force them to relate to it. I think the main issue here is the lack of respect from people. The internet needs to stop attacking others for relating or not relating to this representation and stop dragging down victims simply because they have a different opinion on all this. I think the biggest reason why this representation is even so controversial to begin with is because of the fact that it's in Hazbin Hotel and was made by VivziePop. And although I've heard rumors about Viv and I believe a storyboard artist having some sort of grape fetish, I don't know if I can even say that word on here, I can't find any confirmation for this. I'm not denying its legitimacy, I haven't really seen any proof, so yeah. But even if that's the case, if some victims think this representation is good, then so be it. I can't help it that I relate to Angel here. I can't help it that his anguish, feelings, and experiences are very similar to stuff I've been through no matter who worked on the show. I'm confident that if this show wasn't made by VivziePop and didn't have the pre-existing drama behind it, it wouldn't have gotten so much backlash. That doesn't mean no one would have criticized it, since representation like this, especially one so explicit and raw, usually gets criticized for various reasons because, again, universally perfect representation doesn't exist. And when we also take into account the fact that media literacy is basically dead, that just adds a whole other layer to this issue. But I do think the fact that this is a VivziePop show contributed to the mass amount of hate it got. Even if Viv didn't make this show, people would have still criticized it, obviously, but this was just, in my opinion, a perfect opportunity for people to jump on her, which is really disrespectful to victims in my opinion. You can hate this show, you can be a victim and not like this representation, and you can be a non-victim and still hold opinions about it. But stop using other people's trauma as an excuse to further shit on a show. Especially when your intent isn't actually to defend victims and all you want is an excuse to get people on a cancel train. We're not your scapegoat to use for furthering internet drama. By all means, criticize this show and its representation, but only do so when your reasoning is valid and you have actual critiques to give. Don't just use victims' trauma willy-nilly as a way to get people on a hatred bandwagon because you personally think no one should like this show. Moving on, folks have been saying that this representation is fetishization and glamorizing the topic because it's expressed in a colorful music and dance form. That's a valid thing to think, but I personally loved this approach because this show is a musical, a very colorful one at that, as we discussed earlier, and a lot of its storytelling is done through music and dance, which is obviously fitting. And like any art form, music and dance is a very wide and diverse creative medium, and some people prefer to express their feelings through that and some don't. But I don't think that it's wrong for people who do prefer this medium of storytelling to, well, tell a story through that medium just because some people have a different opinion on storytelling with that art form. We all express things differently, and what may work for one person may not work for another. But that doesn't invalidate the entire existence of a certain art form just because some people don't like it. I'm trying to understand other perspectives as best I can, and I guess for some people, it's not that they don't like music and dance as an art form, but rather see it as an inappropriate way to tell such a serious story. Or maybe they just don't think they should have used such an upbeat song for such dark subject matter. But I just don't personally see it that way. Music and dance is a perfectly acceptable way to tell even the darkest of stories. Hazbin certainly isn't the first nor the last piece of media to do this. And the usage of a very upbeat song was a great move in my opinion, because it reflected how happy and go lucky Angel's career looks on the outside, while simultaneously screaming about the horrors going on the inside. I don't think they chose this song to make light of this situation, but rather chose it to make a point. The lyrics and choreography reflect this. That one part where Angel is dancing and we see a picture of him on the screen behind in the same pose, but obviously he's being assaulted, I think this is a great representation of the fact that there's a dark side to these situations. Not everything you see is the whole story. Angel may be dancing all happy and carefree on stage, but behind the fun and glamour, there's abuse. There's stuff happening behind closed doors, but you don't see it because it's masked. This is so fucking common. You may never know someone is being abused because of how well they hide it or are forced to hide it. Plus, and this is just me, but I honestly can't see how this show glamorizes SA. If anything, I think the details are scarily accurate. Again, not everyone is going to relate to it, but for me and a lot of people, the details hit very close to home. Like how Valentino spams Angel with voicemails from loving to threatening, trying any manipulative tactic to get Angel back. I felt that part deep in my soul. Also, Angel's desire to keep running back to his abuser and using poison as a metaphor for the situation was a really good detail. Maybe this is just personal projection, but that's what I saw in his character. I can't tell you how many times I ran back to the people who abused me and manipulated me because part of me wanted to see the good in them and craved the attention they gave me even if it was toxic attention. I'm out of that place now luckily, but I understood on a deep level how Angel felt in this situation, knowing he's hurting himself but always going back anyway because he can't bear to let go of the thing that's harming him. Although he did sell his soul to Valentino, so he technically can't fully run away even if he wanted to. But there's this part of him that keeps willingly going back while he simultaneously looks for a way out, and it stems from that manipulative hold that Valentino has on him. That is exactly what I went through a few years ago, and it's so surreal seeing something like that represented in a cartoon. Angel's hypersexualization is another thing I really related to. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm aroways and also pretty repulsed by sex, at least most times. My identity is kinda confusing. But generally speaking, I find sex and sexual topics gross. Yet despite that, I'm hypersexual and explore lots of sexual things all the time, especially in the media I consume and create. Because doing so comforts me and makes me feel like I'm reclaiming a part of me that was unlawfully stripped from me years ago. Plus, exploring these topics in a fictional setting gives me a safe outlet to explore these things so I'm not doing it in real life and risking opening up a wound or reliving my trauma. I understand Angel's perspective in sort of hiding behind this hypersexual nature as a mask and coping mechanism for his issues, trying to enjoy this part of him that was tainted and stripped by his abuser even if it's not always healthy. It's like he's trying to find joy and comfort in it, like he wants to take back what was stolen because he has the right to enjoy sex. For me, letting my trauma get to me and prevent me from enjoying these things makes me feel like my abusers won. I want to reclaim what they took from me. And I don't know if this is just personal projection again, but I feel like Angel is not only trying to ruin himself so Valentino would let him go, but I feel like Angel is also trying to reclaim what was stolen from him so he can not only enjoy sex genuinely, but feel like he has some sort of control over his sexuality. There was another issue brought to my attention about how the show sort of jokes a lot about SA, which could undermine the real issues they're trying to represent. And that's a valid point that I thought I should mention. Although I think this representation is accurate, I do think the show could have done without the assault jokes, since trying to spread awareness about a serious issue and then joking about it in the same breath is extremely disrespectful and can undermine the issues you're trying to represent. Like I said earlier, this show is trying too hard to be funny and serious at the same time, and is failing at finding the right balance between the two. Oh, I also can't forget the fact that Angel literally blames himself for what happened, which is super common amongst victims too. I've found myself feeling guilty and like it's my fault that any of this happened to me, but obviously it's not our fault. We're simply manipulated into thinking it is. I'll end this section here because there's just a lot and I don't have time to cover it all, nor do I really think I'm at a proper point in my healing process where I feel comfortable tackling it in any deeper depth. But I feel better getting that out and just want to say that I'm sorry to anyone who's experienced anything of this nature. I hope you're healing. You absolutely don't have to relate to Angel, but if you do, that's valid, and if you don't, that's also valid. but please don't attack each other over it since all victims' perspectives are equally valid, and the last thing we need to do is police our feelings and dictate what kind of representation we're allowed or not allowed to relate to. Now that I got all the main stuff out of the way, I'm going to briefly talk about some random critiques I have that couldn't be categorized. 1. I wish there was more mention of the hotel since that was literally the main plot of the show. But because there were so many things happening at the same time, we didn't really get to explore the concept of this Hazbin Hotel as much as we should have. I think this goes back to the fact that this season just wasn't long enough to cover all these plot points, and certain things ended up getting left behind or ignored. 2. I wish Charlie and Vaggie acted more like a couple. I love them to death and appreciate how they're the healthiest couple in this show, but their relationship is so bland compared to the other romances. Vivzie really struggles to write female characters in general, and the one time we get a girl-ex-girl couple out of the millions of guy-ex-guy couples in this series, they're written in a sort of boring way. And yes, they did do a few couple things in this show, I'm not denying that. I just want to see them do more coupley things more often. I want their relationship to be more than just a 2D thing that gets overshadowed by other relationships and romances in this series. I want to see as much effort and development put into their relationship as all the other ones. But at the same time, I can appreciate the casualness of their relationship, which sort of reflects the fact that they've been together for a while and are super comfortable around each other. So perhaps this complaint doesn't really have much of a leg to stand on, I don't know. 3. The designs for Adam and the other exterminators having sharp teeth and horns and basically looking like demons was cool because it kind of showed that they're equally as bad as the demons they're killing, if not more. But it was also a tad weird to me, and that's because this cartoon was all about showing the hypocrisy in heaven, and I feel like having very angelic looking angels doing horrible things would have really pushed that point rather than having them appear demonic when they do bad things and then looking angelic when they're in heaven. 4. The sound effects in this series were toned down a lot, and I'm so thankful because they went absolutely insane with the sound effects in the pilot, to the point that it was kind of annoying, so I'm glad they improved that. 5. I love how the characters all banded together and really became a found family. Despite all the issues I have with this show, I still managed to grow so attached to these characters by the end, and I honestly felt like tearing up by the last scene. These characters really grew on me, and they seem like such an amazing family of misfits that it was beautiful seeing them all come together. And that's it. It feels so weird talking about this show after years of only having the pilot, but I think it was worth it. This show isn't perfect by any means, and I do think it's a little overhyped, but I also think it gets more hate than it deserves. It has a lot of flaws, but it's really not a pile of shit. Everyone has their opinions, and that's fine, but let people watch it in peace. I don't think it's as horrible as some of the haters like to believe, but that's just me. All in all, I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited for the next season. I hope they improve at least some of these issues, but I don't think I'll quit watching it even if they don't, since, like I said, the show really isn't that terrible, and some of these things like the designs are a bit hard to change now even if they wanted to, so we're sort of stuck with what we have. The show overall is super flawed, but also super good in its own ways. I do have to give credit where credit is due though, since all of the creative employees involved did a great job. Better than most shows I've seen, and I want them all to know that I think they deserve some praise for all their amazing hard work. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making this and would love to do more reviews in the future. And if you have any thoughts you want to add, let me know since I love discussion. But again, keep them civil, please. And with all that out of the way, I hope you all have an amazing day.